So welcome everybody. We'll just wait a few more minutes. We'll see the kind of group we get today. I'll start sharing my screen here. We will, if I remember how to share a screen. All right. We'll get, so yeah, thanks everybody for joining the office hours this month. As mentioned, this is pretty relaxed format, give you guys a chance to ask any questions. I see just a couple in the chat so far. So if anybody else connected has any questions, please put them in the document. Otherwise, we'll have a few topics that I can dig into, and we'll just use some of that time to discuss in details a few other topics. But once again, please feel free to add your questions. But we'll just wait for a few more minutes. Oh, I meant to link the doc. Sorry. Oops, that's supposed to be to everybody. I just put in the chat the link to the doc. So if you want to add some questions, and then we figured out a little bit more with Zoom how to allow you ask the questions in person. So I'll just call out your name and then I'll let you speak. So Frank, if you want to kind of, I see your question here, but if you also want to be able to say it yourself and we can chat about it.
Sure. You guys hear me okay?
Sure can.
Yeah, I'll just read it out. So we're enabling batching in our producer. We've set the batching max publish delay. And just wondering, is that on a per producer basis or is it a per client? So say, for example, we have one Pulsar client. We create 20 producers, each producing in their own threads. Will the batch fire for every producer every, say, 50 milliseconds, for example, or will it fire on that 50 millisecond slot just for the client? Just wondering where that logic is.
Yeah, good question. So that is per producer. So every producer will get its own sort of batch max publishing delay, and in fact, we can kind of let me pull this up real quick. The way that works is all of the consumer builder settings. So I was just going to pull this up right here. If you're using the Java client, I guess I need to switch the screen that I'm sharing. Not consumer builder, producer builder. They're all going to apply per individual. Sorry, let me give me 1 second here. I'll just share on my whole screen. That'll make this easy so I don't have to swap between things. So all of in the producer builder, each one of these settings is unique per producer. So as we mentioned there, let me do that one more time. Maybe one more time still. Oops. So for context for everybody, batch max publish. I know it's one of these words in here. So the batching max publish delay. So every one of these settings in the producer builder, if we expose it to you at the producer builder, you can be guaranteed that it only applies to this single producer. So that's sort of a general rule there is, and the way that we do that, right, is that each one of these producers, yes, they share a Pulsar client, but the way they share that Pulsar client is it gets multiplexed over the connection. But as far as the state and all the ways that the producer is interacting with the broker, all of that is entirely independent per producer. So for example, not only just, this batch max publish delay, but whether batching is enabled at all, some of the, like how batches get built, sequence IDs, etc. All of these settings in the producer builder are specific to individual producers, and this should hold true for all the other client libraries as well. Is that adding any of these individual settings should only apply to individual producers, and then the clients are, yes, there is some sharing of the client, but that is primarily just how those messages get multiplexed over a connection. So one way to think about this is that, a client is primarily about establishing connections, and producers and consumers are primarily are the sort of logical APIs for everything having to do with the actual producing and consuming.
Great, thank you.
Hopefully that also gives some context there. Well, you got another one, Frank. You wanted to?
Sure. Yeah, some of the Pulsar clients are missing some useful functionality, and I just picked out some examples from the feature metrics of it looks like key shared and NAC are not present for Python. Again, I'm not sure 100% sure this is up to date, but I do notice that at least for things like the Go client we're playing around with, it either supports durable or non-durable, but not the other one. It wasn't clear to me which one it was. But just wondering whether any plans or efforts around kind of reconciling that over time.
Yes, definitely. The goal is to have that, all of these clients here have even support. It does look like this is a little bit out of date because Python does have support for key shared subscriptions. Okay. So, well, I cannot find a good example. I was thinking we had that docked, but the docs aren't linking right there. So, and usually the best thing to check if you want to dig into a detail is here on the Pulsar website, underneath the clients. Each of the clients of the official supported clients should have a link to the generated documentation. And generally, we use just whatever language bindings or whatever documentation engines are pretty standard for those. And so in this case with the consumer, when we look at how we create a consumer, actually let's subscribe. You should see that these consumer types, oh, maybe we don't enumerate them here. That's probably another place we can improve the documentation, but for the Python client here. But yeah, so most of the time these should be up to date in case this client feature matrix is not. Most of the documentation should be fairly robust and sort of presenting all the options that are currently available. But yes, the Python client does support key shared currently. NAC I'm less sure of. And so I want to talk a little bit before about how some of this works in Pulsar. So, obviously the Java bindings are very well supported. And then generally, many of the languages build on top of the C++ library. So there's a C++ library, libpulsar. And so for most languages like Python, Node.js, there's also the Ruby client that's in progress. They build on top of these C++ bindings. And so usually if it's something that's supported actually in the C++ binding, support within the client languages is either there or very simple to add, as we just kind of need to expose something through those bindings. So that can kind of give you some idea of, some of those things. And as far as, the communities, or through the community, we're also looking to really find people who are really interested in if there's a binding that, you're heavily invested in. Oftentimes this is a great way to contribute in the community and to be able to learn, more about the details of Pulsar, if that is something you're interested in. So just want to always keep that there, as if you have some interest in contributing and being part of the community more actively. The binding or the SDK's bindings are a great way to do so. Does that answer your question there, Frank?
It does. Thanks.
Okay, and if there's any specific issues, usually most of them should be tracked, and it's a great way to kind of just get. Usually we'll have different. There'll be tags for each one of the different language bindings. And this is also a good way to sort of see the current state of what's in progress, as well as what open issues still need to be improved there. Another way, a good way to know how to leverage the content there. All right, then let me get back to this. Oops. So Jared, I'll let you talk. I'll let you speak here if you're interested in want to speak about your questions a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
So my first question is basically about dealing with failures when you have strict ordering requirements. I assume if you have a sequence of items and one of them goes a dead letter, the next item and next message is going to come through, which would break your ordering. Is that like when you would use that retry topic, when you really need those things to stay in order, and eventually you need to go somehow fix that head message in that sequence? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and also a very good conceptual question, right? Is given that Pulsar kind of gives you that flexibility, both to have more of an ordered semantic that you really want to care about ordering, but also has all those features around dead letter queues, retry topics, etc.
Right.
And I guess the answer really is it's sort of up to you, right? What we generally suggest is that if you really care a lot about order, then some of these other the dead letter queues, the retry topics, are going to cause some ordering problems. So you really want to evaluate and make sure that if you're not able to process that message, if you it might be the correct behavior to just stop consuming, right? In certain situations, that's sort of the right answer to make sure and say, okay, I'm going to stop here because order is the most important thing. And so generally what I would say though, if you're sort of I mostly care about order, and that's, I think, where a lot of people find themselves, is I don't want to stop the world. I want to continue processing. You are still, that message is still going to exist in its original form in the key shared topic, especially if you use retention, right? So making use of those retention capabilities to still have the original data in order. And then you may use the dead letter topics or retry as a way to sort of notify you and do it like a best effort. And then, you fix that bug and you restart and replay some data and get it all back in order, is generally how I would say you want to deal with some of these ordering situations. Because yes, that retry topic will cause, reordering events.
Okay. And then if you didn't configure retry or dead letter and there was something failing, and would other keys continue to be processed, or would it completely block the whole topic from being processed?
Other consumers would not be impacted, but we don't do it on a per key basis in the client, in that individual consumer. So it would block that entire consumer, but not any other consumers. So one of the nice things about key shared is that you can kind of scale that out a lot, beyond your number of partitions, etc. But yeah, you would still have that one consumer be sort of impacted there.
Okay, awesome. That answers my question.
Yeah, good question.
Thanks. My next one was just about, we're new to Pulsar and trying to figure out as the amount of topics in our organization grow, and how do developers go discover what's out there from other teams that they're publishing, see the data easily. Is there tooling around that, or best practices for storing things in separate repositories or something, like contracts, those kind of things?
Yeah, so I'll sort of answer that in two different aspects to that, right? one is like, what is there? What are people publishing? And really like the multi-tenancy model is pretty flexible and really designed to kind of help on some of those use cases. So as an example, suppose that you sort of have you're doing like modern microservices. You have some of your applications that, usually in these microservices, there may be some topics that you only want to sort of use internally. You don't want them to become like part of the public API, so to say,
Sure. Yep.
of your microservice versus, other topics that you want to use those for communication. You want to leverage those. And so one of the ways that we've suggested and continue to think is a pretty good pattern is that if you have either you can do that just at the namespace level, maybe you have like my app internal, and in that you kind of have a convention of saying, hey, these are internal, don't go look at these. But sometimes you can actually also put those versus like the external ones, right? With like, hey, these are the ones that data discovery. Here they're going to have, I'll talk a little about Pulsar schema, but you might have a standard of saying those all have to be validated with schema.
Right.
That does that. And so, and then you can actually have those namespaces live across separate tenants. So suppose that, your main purpose for those external topics is like to your, write those as part of like a data lake strategy, right? For getting data into a data lake.
Sure.
It may make sense to actually say, okay, where you just have a different tenant that has, more of a shared organizational responsibility, like shared across the organization, where teams can place the topics that are all sort of intended to be used that way. So that's maybe a way that you can very quickly say, okay, here at the tenant level, everything under this is intended to be like used across the organization, versus maybe you have a tenant per like your team and your internal apps, and those are all sort of more private API.
Okay.
And then, usually the second part of that is obviously that hopefully, can design to make the topic discovery easy. So you can kind of have a good, sort of discovery process there. But then there's also obviously this like, okay, what actually is the data? What's the format of this data? And Pulsar schema is really great for that. So one of the aspects about Pulsar schema, set schema. Oh gosh, I'll have to remember. There's a namespace policy. So when you combine that sort of strategy with the set schema validation force.
Okay.
This has some cost to it because it means that we're going to be like validating schema on the broker.
Right.
But essentially, that can allow you to say, okay, hey, if I'm creating one of these public topics and you're going to write into one of these, it's got to have a schema, and then we can just use the Pulsar, Pulsar admin correctly. Schemas. This, then there's other APIs for this allow you to just get the schema for a topic, etc.
Right.
And so that's, obviously a good combination of things there. And then I'll finally answer that question with one other thing that we've talked about a little bit as a roadmap item is to allow for you to like add some additional metadata to topics, sort of like tags,
Oh, cool.
Which is something that we don't have like a firm date for when that is, but if there's interest in something like that, throw that up in the channel and whatnot. We'd be happy to kind of chat about what would make sense, or for you to kind of be able to label topics with a tagging system and then kind of query for some of those topics based on tags, etc.
Awesome. Are there any like visual tools to help with like, a lot of developers don't have ton of understanding of all the Pulsar APIs and how to,
Sure.
use the admin tool to go find all the topics and then go find the schema for each individual of those things.
Yeah, so part of the, in the open source ecosystem, there's under Apache is Pulsar Manager. And it kind of gives you a visual tool for being able to see tenants, namespaces, etc. Currently, this isn't like the way that it talks. It's not like aware of your individual users. Like if they only have access to one or two tenants, it's just, it kind of just uses super user credentials, but still a really good way to be able to kind of use that to poke around, get people familiar with some of those things rather than having to use just the CLI tool.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, one more real quick before you move on. Do you have any, like you guys talked about how you kind of the tenant and namespace recommendations were kind of things you've been recommending to people. Do you have those documented anywhere in the public? Like, I think it'd be awesome if you guys had those.
We have some, I think we have a blog post or two that's in progress about that, but not at the moment. In the open source, we tend to keep it pretty unopinionated, and that's something we'll kind of try and get more blog posts and whatnot and best practices around. But yeah, definitely getting some of that more documented. The other thing I will say is if you have a team, a broader team, we do developer trainings quarterly, and those are a great resource as well. Don, if you want to put in the chat, link to some of that. There's a lot of in that training where we really dig into some of those design ideas and best practices and whatnot.
Yeah, I actually went through one of those. It was good.
Okay, good. Cool. Yeah, we will, and some of that content is going to be making its way into modules just that will be for public consumption. So some things in the works.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, that's all we have for questions on the that are written down here. But I think there's a few more people that are joined here. If any of you have any, was there one in chat that I missed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me get over to that. Do you have any DevOps best practices or training? Yeah, good question, Alex. So we do have our for training, we do have an operations training that, Don, I think you'd be the best person to know when the date is for the first public version of that operations training.
Yeah, the first public version is May 17th and 18th.
May 17th and 18th. So yeah, in May, and we can just put in the chat a link to that because I think it's already.
I don't think the sign up is live yet.
Okay, the sign ups, but yeah, if you're subscribed to the StreamNative newsletter, we will send that out there, and I think that sign up should be in the next couple weeks here.
It'll probably be in April.
Okay, and that will then be the first public version of that, but what I was just going to say was if you have any specific questions about, I'm happy to give some general ideas of best practices. So one thing I would mention is that if you're just getting started with Pulsar, the Pulsar Helm charts are a pretty robust set of Helm charts, and they are, if you're running Kubernetes, they're a great way to get started with Pulsar that really gives some ideas of best practices sort of encoded within those Helm charts. Include support for things like TLS, authorization, like setting up the JWT authorization for you. Has good reasonable defaults for high availability, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a great way to sort of go with that. Also on the documentation, oops, not Google Docs. In the documentation, as far as like other things about like upgrades, I don't remember where this is. No, not this one. this administration section, it has throughout quite a fair amount of kind of best practices for around operating the cluster. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Any other resources I would point you towards. I think that covers most of it. Oh, my screen is mostly blocked by the chat. Oh, sorry. I thought it was actually moved over. Thanks, Fred. Sorry, I was just going to show here in this administration section. There it is. Also details about this. One of the things that often throws people off is like load balancing. And so this gives a good idea about load balancing. So this is usually one of those sorts of topics that as you kind of get more involved with Pulsar, understanding a little bit about load balancing, understanding about like how Pulsar proxy interacts with brokers and whatnot is a great way of being able to learn a bit more about Pulsar from a DevOps perspective. Did that answer your question, Alex? If there's any other follow-ups, let me know. If you have any specific questions, happy to talk about them here. All right. Definitely look forward. I will actually be giving that training in whenever that is. Let me.
Fred will be giving the fundamentals standalone in April, but there's an intro that you'll be giving next on the 24th.
I was referring to the operations training.
Sorry.
Yeah, the operations training I will be giving on that. And sorry, there was a question here about my screen ratio. I actually meant to resize that before I just joined here, but if I do that now, it'll throw things off. I will remember to do that next time. So apologies for that. The problems of an ultra wide monitor sometimes, real first world problem. All right. Well, I don't. If there's any other questions from anybody, otherwise, as I mentioned, there's a few extra topics. Yet another question there. Jared. Go ahead.
Since there's no more questions, just about troubleshooting. Like our team only has access to really like Datadog as far as being able to troubleshoot things when they go wrong in prod right now. So you can't use the manager or anything like that. Like one of the things I've had a hard time with is, all right, I'm seeing, these topics back up, but now how do I go find out like where the backup is? How do you go about doing that when you only have like stats from Datadog? Like I know it's obviously one of the subscriptions, but tracking that down seems to be really tough. Just in Datadog, I wasn't sure if there was any plans for further expanding the dashboards that you guys provide for Datadog.
So I'll be very straightforward in saying that some of the Datadog, the problem with Datadog is that the number of metrics that Pulsar produces makes some of the cost model of Datadog really difficult.
Gotcha.
So, and am I sharing my screen here properly? Sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to kind of, but you're not unique in sort of that Datadog's a great tool. And so I want to kind of reference a few resources here, or a good idea of that is, and I'll just we can kind of walk through that with a Pulsar standalone. Most of the metrics that you're going to get out of Pulsar also are available through the Pulsar admin APIs.
Okay.
So one of the ways in which you can actually get very detailed metrics and then drill in if you only have like some high level metrics in Datadog is there is a command called broker stats, and you can get the topics for an entire, and I just have to remember the command is here. No, that should be it. And obviously this is just using a standalone, so this is not going to be very interesting data here. but
Sure.
all of this, the metrics that are being dumped for each individual broker, you can get all of those. So for an individual, as an idea here, this doesn't have any traffic. Let me actually just do that so that we get some more interesting data. And we'll just give it so I'm just going to apply some load to this cluster so we can sort of, poke a little bit and see some real metrics here. Yeah, this tool right here will let you see, some of these metrics, and this is primarily, there's different dimensions that get it here. These basically correspond to like in Prometheus, like the different labels that get attached. So you can actually look through and see here, okay, so here I've got my, my public default namespace, and I can see some of these metrics that are like just about the broker, but I can also pull up some metrics with this about individual topics. So those are like some higher level metrics. They deal more with like JVM, whatnot, as well as like how things are actually going to the BookKeeper layer. But you do have access to all the deeper level metrics here.
Right.
So you can actually see,
Okay.
I have my, this is not the one I want to look at. It's this one right here. So I have this topic, this test topic that I'm publishing to. So I can actually see my connected publishers. I can see my subscriptions and the backlog building up. And it will actually also, if I had an active subscription, it would show those subscriptions.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. And then the only other thing I'll mention with that is if there's sometimes, if that's great if you don't know where it is. If you know where it is, there's this topic stats command that will give you sort of a more narrowed in view. That's going to have a ton. If you have lots of active topics, that's going to be very large. So this topic stats is a really ideal way. If you already know maybe the topic or the namespace, you can just use that command and very quickly get an idea of your publishers, your subscriptions, your backlogs, etc.
Okay. Awesome.
Good question. Yeah. And
I think that'd be an interesting training, just because streaming is so new to so many people. Like, we know how to troubleshoot database issues, almost every developer does, but understanding how to go about the just different, vast amounts of different things that could go wrong when you're doing streaming is
good feedback. Yes.
Training just on dealing with production issues. Like, how do I know what's going on here?
Yeah. One thing, I don't know if you run on Kubernetes and whatnot, but it sometimes can be worth it actually to just have a small Prometheus if you want to have like a good view there. And like I said, just to give more of an idea of everything that's there, there's very detailed metrics that Pulsar has. Oops, if you click the right button. Let me make this a little bit bigger since so that goes all the way down to sort of individual subscriptions in the metric system. And it's very easy to then create alerts on those, like, hey, I have an alert that goes to a backlog and whatnot. But as mentioned, if you have, we track these per topic, per subscription, and Datadog charges like per unique metric. So it can just be, it can get a little bit crazy for their model, but something to consider if you want to kind of find a cost-effective way to do that is actually just running a small Grafana Prometheus. Is not a bad way to go.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the other channels. Awesome. Raised hands is great. Let me remember how to get there. There we go. Every once in a while, having multiple monitors really is more of a challenge than Oops. There we go. All right. Frank, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I had a quick question, something I hit today. I have a namespace that has a small number of topics in it. They're really just event topics. But I am seeing a number of error messages saying fail to split namespace. And I'm surprised that I have like 12 brokers and there's only like 6 of these topics. I'm surprised that Pulsar is trying to say split these up because there's only 6 topics across these 12 brokers. I wonder if you comment on how that might be.
Yes. So I'm trying to think of the best way to give you some visuals here. So let me go to the settings here. That'll probably be the best way to talk about this. So in the configuration here, there's triggers for when topics split.
Yeah, I think you're on a different screen in terms of what you're sharing.
Oh,
I'm not seeing anything you're clicking on.
Oh, I'm just sharing. I don't know how that got swapped over. Okay, is that better there? All
yeah,
right.
if you could zoom in, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll do. Actually, let me just do this, and then I'll just fix it by. Once again, this is where ultra wide monitor, such a first world problem. Hopefully that's a little bit better there.
Oh yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. So there is settings within Pulsar, and let me finally give me 1 second. I will. Okay. So there's a few triggers that cause bundle splits to happen. And some of those triggers are actually based on message rate and bandwidth being consumed by an individual bundle. Yeah. So if you run into a situation where you're pushing over and once again, this is per bundle. So if a single bundle is pushing over 100 megabytes per second, and that's includes both the in and out, right. We're going to try and trigger a bundle split.
Yep.
So that's why you may see some of these. I think this one. We're asking IntelliJ to work hard here, but these settings about like the max number of topics, the max number of connected sessions, if you're doing a lot of fan out, message rates, bandwidth, those can all be used as triggers for saying let's split a bundle. Right. So there's a number of scenarios in which that may happen, and usually these defaults are pretty sane, but certainly this is one of those things that say, hey, I'm using big instances and I expect to have really busy topics, like individual topics. They may not make sense in all situations. But in general, even if a bundle only ends up with a single topic, that's sort of a-okay, assuming that you're really trying to focus on, one of these use cases of just making sure that you're getting well distributed across the cluster.
Gotcha.
Because go ahead.
I was going to ask, is there any downside to turning off the split bundles? Obviously, you'll lose some load balancing, but
yeah. So if you have pretty stable load, and the downsides are pretty minimal in terms of you're still going to load balance, right? So that will still take place like normal, but you may not have needs for splitting if you have pretty stable workloads. and so, yeah, the only thing I would say is that if you kind of have more variance in your workload, you have natural organic growth, the bundle splitting is probably something you're mostly want to keep enabled. But and I'd also be curious in that for your error messages where it said it failed to split, did it give a reason why? Was it something?
No, I didn't see any.
Okay.
There
Well,
might-
yeah, if you want to throw something in the chat there or in the Pulsar open source, always happy to kind of understand. Most of those things should not hopefully cause too many issues. There is some cases where you end up with, like, once again, you have a single topic that's the only thing left in that bundle. We can't really split it more than the single topic. So yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? I think Alex, you had your hand up for a second, but anything else you wanted to ask? All right, I guess not. Well, we've got about 15, 20 minutes left here. So I wanted to cover just, unless nobody else has any questions, a few other things that we can sort of talk about. One of those things is, I think we'll get a lot of questions about, like, hey, when should I expect release X? And so one of the things that's and that's something that we actually will try. I think there's a document we're writing to get this in the open source, but into the open source documentation. But until then, I just wanted to kind of link this to everybody. The details of the time-based release plan, and so I just linked that in the documentation here. And this goes pretty into detail about how we do our time-based releases. But from a high level, time-based releases is for minor versions is generally in these windows. So we'll have a release in December, and then we shoot for roughly March. So the quarters are their pretty typical quarter release process. So sometimes it's not super strict, but we just had 2.7.1 come out, and so 2.8.0. The release process, I think, is going to start in the next couple of weeks here. So it'll probably be April. Is that right, CJ? So I joined.
Sorry, I don't expect that you cue me. So
yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing. Yeah. So it will start that. So if you ever have, and then that's the process for the minor releases. Patch releases and whatnot, we generally try and do every like 4 to 6 weeks. And usually we'll kind of do the most 2 release versions. So like, right now 2.6.3 and 2.7. And then as soon as 2.8 comes out, it'll be sort of 2.7 and 2.8, where we'll continue to do patch releases. Particularly, obviously, if that kind of depends on if it's a new feature versus something that is, across those multiple versions. Any questions about that release process? Hopefully that helps clarify some questions there for anybody who's wondered. All right. The other thing I was gonna mention, just if with extra time, was talk a little bit about key shared subscriptions. Let me just actually pause my share here and pull this up. Key shared subscriptions are a really, really great feature. They're really quite useful, but there's oftentimes a lot of questions about, how they work, how you might use them. Sorry, there's a lot of slides here, so take a minute for it to load. Give me 1 second.
Are we supposed to be seeing something, Addison?
No, I paused my share just while I pulled up those topics. You don't have to see me wait for slides to load. There we go. All right. So talk a little bit about key shared subscriptions here. And so for context, there's a shared subscription model, right? In the shared subscription, there's no ordering, and we're just sort of writing those messages out. Versus with the key shared, we give you that ordering per key. And so one of the things I wanted to just pull this diagram up for is talking a little bit more in detail about
Addison, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing.
Is it now there?
No, we're still seeing the code. Yeah. There
we go. I forgot I had opened that. So as mentioned here, here's so once again with shared, this model where there's no order guarantees per consumer, and just they're competing consumers that each get their own messages, versus key shared, where we have this nice mix of being able to use some get ordering per key. And here in this example here, we show that for each individual keys. But one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is how key shared works sort of internally. And so the way that key shared, I don't know if I'll be able to find the slide in the time that I want to take talking about this, but which I guess I'll just talk about it, is that what actually happens here is that these consumers all find a range of keys that they're going to be subscribed to. And so basically the way this works is you're probably already somewhat familiar with how we do partitioning of messages to topics. Well, then we can take those individual topics and the keys in that topic and then sort of rehash them again. And then to every individual consumer say, okay, we're going to have this consumer connect, and it's going to be responsible for some hash range of the keys that we're going to use. And so in the default mode, that is very, it's just going to, the key range is going to be split evenly among the number of consumers. So what that means is that if you have consumers join and leave and whatnot, you're going to see there's the potential for some, reordering there of how that works. And if you have a more sophisticated use case, you can actually, with this shared subscription, you can set let me find that in the code here real quick. You can set a key shared range, key shared policy. And you can also implement one of these policies that allows for some of these things. But essentially, this allows you to sort of say, okay, here's the range of keys that I care about, and I'll show usage of that in the tests here. There we go. So I can actually say, hey, I want to use a key shared policy sticky, and I want to use a hash range that I'm defining. I want these ranges of 0 to 9 and 0 to, well, this fails in this case, but essentially allows you to define the range of keys that you want to consume as a consumer. And so that's one of those things that, depending on your use case, can be very useful to understand with key shared policies. And so I think probably we don't have enough time to dig into this too deeply, but if anybody has any questions, please let me know. But this allows you to set a range of keys you'd like to use, and gives you some real flexibility in how those key shared consumers are going to get messages assigned to them. Any questions about that? If anybody has any, please raise your hand. All right. And I'm trying to, we have about 10 minutes here. I was trying to remember the last topic that I was going to cover if we had some extra time. I was going to talk a little bit about, but I don't know if we have enough time to cover that in enough depth here with as much time as we have left. So if not, I'll move that to next week. We can talk a little bit more about message deletion, how messages are deleted, in Pulsar, like actually deleted. But that'll probably be not next week, but next month. So if there's no other questions, I'm happy to wait a few more minutes. We can kind of we'll end a few minutes early here today. But please, if you have any last minute questions.